It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. Hey, we're here with El Stahura.
Hello.
Chad Juttner.
Hello.
Peter Lawrence.
Hi there.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. Today we're going to talk about documentation. Oh my gosh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah,
we're going to talk
we
about how do you get out of doing documentation.
Yeah, we want to start the year, our season off with something that is going to be thrilling and filled with passion. But actually, we're going to kind of get there, even though it may not seem like it at the outset.
It's like a roller coaster.
It is like a roller coaster.
I honestly want...
Sounds like outrageous claims.
I honestly want whoever listens to this to message us something like, yes, I seeked out this podcast on documentation because why?
This has been my bugbear for decades.
Yeah, bugbear. There you go.
No, this is what I use to push back against the horrendous requirements from someone else. That I found this podcast that agreed with my side of the argument.
Nice.
Right. When they said, we want you to do tons of document every detail of everything, I said, no, sir, I will not.
I found 4 experts on the internet, which is never wrong.
Please listen to this extended podcast to understand my argument.
The code is the documentation, and I shouldn't have to write anything because they comment their code. So, how much documentation have you written in your career? Could you fill War and Peace, a volume like that?
I have been lucky enough to barely fill a volume of War and Peace in my 25-year career. Let's just say that we're keeping it simple, or we're delegating as much as possible for the very compact, concise documentation. Always introduce Java docs, always introduce ways for other people to make documentation for me, all of those kinds of things.
So, El, what's the best reason you can think of for documenting?
When your team has grown to a point where it's not you and your 2 closest buds or cousins or frenemies or however you want to refer to your coworkers.
Never worked with cousins.
We're going to come back to that, Peter. So when you've grown enough that you can't rely on the knowledge that if I write it down, that's just a waste of my time because that information is already in the person who sits across from me's head. When you're a small team, you're running and all the tribal knowledge is just in your head. But you reach a point, if you're growing as a company, if you're growing as a team, where you can't rely on that anymore. And so you need to have references for, hey, you remember this thing we do once a quarter? And here are some common ways that once a quarter thing will fail. You need to have that kind of stuff written down.
So what are we documenting in that situation where there's new people going to roll in, a lot of stuff happening on the project? There's documentation of, we need a record of what's happening, and we need a record of what decisions were made and why. But there's also documentation of, we're done with this thing, we're leaving it behind for other people to use and maintain. So distinguishing between the two, that on-the-fly documentation as you work for the project, how much do you think you really need?
None. Any amount. Here's what I need. I need a glossary of terms, right? For whatever business problem you're solving, I just want to know how you guys have changed the English language and how you use it to represent the problems that you're solving for, right? Because different folks do it I hear, regular English words in a completely different context when you're consulting, right? Like lots
Like
of
SAS.
that Yeah.
Like SAS, is it
Yeah,
the
exactly.
noun? Is it the the statistical software? Is it CSS? What are we? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I want two things. I want a glossary of terms so that when I'm working on a problem, I can understand specifically if I'm brand new to a like a domain, I can understand the concepts that are going into it and maybe a little like here's how they relate to each other, right? So glossary, and then I just want a README MD on my at the base of my source code repository that tells me how to build my environment. After that, I'm not going to probably won't read a whole heck of a lot, right? Like, especially if I'm coming into a project that has already got ahead of steam,
Right.
So in that case, when you say, you're probably not going to read a whole heck of a lot of the other documentation, what has gone wrong in the past, or why hasn't that been helpful for you in the past?
Because it gives you the wrong ideas, right? Like, what's the last thing you do, right? The last thing we always do is update the documentation, if we do that at all. So you might read a document that's been written 5 years ago by somebody that had really good intentions, pick it up 5 years later, so much has changed that it's actually harmful to the project to continue to follow said documentation. So this is why, Peter and I kind of joked about zero documentation is the right amount. Well, if there's zero documentation, there's zero to update. You have to look at the code, you have to look at, your glossary, and you have to figure out what's relevant right now. As opposed to if you've got reams of documentation, right? That is 2 full-time jobs to keep that updated and relevant. It is an anti-pattern to have that much cruft in my world around the project.
Did you just say anti-pattern and cruft in the same sentence?
I sure did.
And
So-
you want us to give you a list of jargon?
Peter, do you know what an anti-pattern is?
I do.
Do you understand what cruft is?
Absolutely.
We're good.
Those are programmer terms.
We're not.
Yeah.
All of us in my camera don't know what cruft is. Is that like
Cruft is-
nervous debris?
Yeah, it's like tech dandruff.
Yeah.
Cruft. All right.
Yeah, it's horrible. Like, honestly though, like, all right, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Let me jump in with one thought. A thought that I had before coming into this topic was the best kind of documentation is living documentation. So, and by that I mean documentation that changes and is forced to change as the project changes or as the software changes, right? Like, this is some of the things where we talk about, Java docs, which is for the non-technical folks out there. This is stuff that decorates each method or different properties and things like that. And there are comments that are in the code, and you can build documentation from those things, right? You can, if somebody really wants documentation, you can say, okay, go build a document for this API or whatever, and it will build out said documentation for you, and it'll build it on the fly, and it'll be live. The documentation that Chad hates and I hate is, this dead tree doc that's stuffed in a 3-ring binder that gets passed on a velvet sheet between project people as they come onto the project, say, oh, here is the dust-covered 3-ring binder. Please store this at your desk and hand it to the next person for them to ignore as they go on.
All the stuff that ends up on the pile that was a great idea at the time.
Right.
It was well-intentioned. Well, you got to have governance. So we're going to have to create a big governance document that says how we're going to govern this whole thing.
Sure.
And why, and we have to have our envisioning.
We have to write these rules down so we know when to break them.
Right.
Imagine
we have
the
to write all
person
these
that goes
rules
back to
down
those
that we
documents.
don't know about and don't know how to enforce or don't enforce that don't really matter.
Right.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Chad?
I mean, imagine the person that goes back to the governance document, right? Like, what? I don't know.
That means they're waiting for permissions, like they've just started on a team and they're blocked until their ticket gets fulfilled.
Yeah. they have a document up. They have something that they can hit Alt Tab to while they're playing Galaga on their actual screen, right? Oh no, I'm reading the documentation. Somebody
That's
walks
right.
by, Alt Tab.
Paging through it.
Now
So
I did work on a project where when I arrived, it was well underway. It was, supposed to be half done. And I read everything they had created when I got there. I just read everything, envisioning and governance and plans and all the stuff. And it was helpful because it told me what the intent of the business was for the project. That was helpful for me at that time.
Right.
I think that was a very specific use case. I don't know what that information, like who else would have or benefited from that, but they captured all of that. And then based on that understanding, I was able to kind of help make some changes and get people back on track and just kind of move forward. But again, what did it take for them to put all that together?
And how up to date was it after you finished the project?
Oh, no, not up to date. And
Yeah, go ahead, Elle.
I was going to say, like, with a lot, especially when we're talking more enterprise level, chances are there's going to be just documents aplenty just in order to get the financing approved and the project management team going so that they can start building out stories and then the stories themselves. And so I think part of the question is also what don't those documents cover that really requires that you create separate documentation instead of leveraging existing things that other people have written to kind of get a sense, Kyle, to like the intent of what they want to do.
And I don't look at like a diagram, a working diagram, so you know how you're going to build something like a planning document, a planning tool. There's that kind of stuff. There's like project artifacts, scope statements, and like that's all part of the plan. I don't look at that as being documentation necessarily. I look at that as being planning tools for keeping the thing going. And before you build something, you need to know what you're going to build and what you're going to do. And I think stories are along the same line. To me, documentation is like, here's how it's built. Like here's how you use it. Here's how you make changes to the configuration. Here's a list of all of the things that you need to know. Here's all the data types. Here's all the, like, some of it can be generated from that, all those artifacts and planning and stuff like that. You can capture it that way. But it's like, to me, documentation is the extra overhead that you're writing beyond that stuff about that stuff. Does that make sense?
Usually, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I still have strong feelings about documentation, that those things that you are producing, it's like, that is excellent things to put on a bookshelf somewhere and somebody will reference maybe once.
Yeah, that's the thing, is you're adding a layer of abstraction to the whole thing. And it's like, why do that?
Yeah.
Because really you need to look at reality. Okay, what's the code? You got to dig into it. What's the actual configuration?
Which gets back to Peter's thing, which is Java Doc. And that's the stuff I can get on board with, right? Like Java Doc. And when I can, we produce as part of just regular development. If you're writing an API, right? There's tools now that automatically produce API documentation for you. So another consumer,
right,
even if it's all an internal app, can consume your APIs, right? So living documentation is the only documentation that I really, really care about outside of that glossary. As far as intent goes, I mean, it's maybe, but like we get that with happy hours. I find out the project's intent more at a happy hour than I do by reading you know, a presentation from Gartner from years ago, or, you know, whatever they want to implement. So yeah.
All right. So I'm going to fill this empty space with a question for you, Kyle. How many copies of War and Peace have you written?
9.
9?
Because I have to write user how-to stuff, admin guides, like, if you need to change this, lists of, what properties are used where, like, kind of, because my stuff is like, has in the past, I haven't been writing any lately, but then they're like training materials. I've done a lot of that stuff because I have to take people through training and handouts and but again, I don't know how much of that gets read. I've been asked to like go way overboard and I've pushed back. If I write this to the detail you're asking me to, I'm writing a book that you can go buy. Like these, there's five of these for using this tool. Like, I can extend that to include like the stuff that you really need to know to maintain this thing, but I don't need to write the manual on how to do everything in this tool.
Right.
This is the magic of like some of the documentation. So I'm a huge fan of putting documentation in a wiki, and I can go, if you've got a nice one like Confluence, I can see specifically how many people have opened this page, right? And there,
that's a mean feature.
Yes, yeah. I have data it's very mean, because I can look at that and say the person that wrote it and me, because I just went here. Like there's 2 people that looked at this, right? This does not need to exist. It's only reinforced what you and I have been talking about, Peter, that living documentation is really the only thing that matters to me. Actually, our glossary has been looked at by literally everybody, but outside of that, everything else just kind of rots. And the more that's out there, the harder it is to find the stuff that matters.
Right. Search tools help.
I think the goal for all of it is knowledge capture. And like we have all this knowledge about all the systems and things we're doing. We don't want it to leave. We don't want it to walk out the door if somebody leaves. Like there's way too much in this person's head. We don't want to lose that. How are we going to do knowledge transfer? How are we going to do knowledge capture? And it's like, yeah, knowledge management is a whole thing. And to do like knowledge capture, the big part of that is retrieval. Like just because it's captured doesn't mean people can find it.
Right.
And make use of it. So like, where do you put it? How do you like lead people to it? It's like if I'm writing something for the developers that are going to be looking at my code, comments in my code, like they're going to be in there anyway. And it's in context of what I'm doing or what I did. So to me, that makes sense versus in a separate document in a junk drawer folder called Project X.
That's right.
Or Kyle's reference materials, where it's like it's going to be a grab bag of information.
It's a mess. Yeah.
That's a great point, Kyle. Is like where this stuff lives is super important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's like I already said, I like a nice wiki. Not a huge fan of SharePoint, but I love documentation that sits alongside my code base. So documentation directly in the code, living documentation, all that stuff is great. If I have to go find it, I'm not going to, unless it's, if it's not part of my day-to-day, whatever. I might as well not exist.
Yeah. Elle, how about you? How many copies of War and Peace have you written?
I don't think I've gotten enough to fill one, thankfully.
Nice.
if I had kept on the trajectory of my early career, yes, I would absolutely have filled that, because it took some learning on my end, just to kind of see with my own eyes that, hey, this thing that I spent way too much time on trying to explain the world, nobody cares about, first of all. Or if there are one or two people who care about it, they care about a paragraph and not the pages.
Right.
So that's certainly taught me to pull back a lot. Chad, I think with your example of having a glossary, like absolutely for your databases, where on earth do I find what information where? Because just because a database is labeled sales doesn't mean it actually holds the sales data.
Right.
It used to, I swear.
Exactly. At one point in time.
Every company needs a acronometer and a
Yes.
jargon czar that maintains it, and you point new people to it. You search for the terms, the initials, whatever, and it gives you the 5 different answers of what the thing means and who it, like, in what context. That'd be really nice if everybody just did that.
Yeah. Over time, I kind of have some red flags that I'll see at companies of, all right, we have an opportunity to make things better here. Where the state of the documentation will tell me a lot about the state of the tech or the state of just the culture at a particular company. So if I see documentation in 14 places instead of 1, then I know, okay, this was 14 separate people thought documentation was a good idea and it wasn't coordinated at all. If I see individual people called out in the documentation instead of teams, like talk to Jeff. Like, well, Jeff left the company 5 years ago, so
Yeah,
Track down
That's-
Jeff, then talk to Jeff and ask him.
yeah,
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is like who, like, somebody, I was at a place and my company got bought out and blah blah blah, and they're like, yeah, we got to document everything, right? And I'm like, I'm probably not going to do that, but I started to, like, okay, here's how you deploy to stage. Who the heck cares, right? Like, how you deployed to stage in 2015 is probably going to be relevant for maybe a quarter of 2015, right? So again, the time and effort it takes to keep this stuff up to date is truly not worth it.
well, and I think, Chad, to your point, it kind of can reveal how chaotic things might be. Like if you have to document how you deployed a stage for these 3 applications and then create 6 more documents for deploying to stage for your other 25, then that's a conversation talk about maybe we need to look at the applications in our deployment process and not let's create more documentation to keep these things separate.
That's a light bulb moment that says you need CI/CD and DevOps because you have too many different ways of doing the same thing, right? There should only be one. And if you have only one way to do the same thing across multiple projects, that's usually wonderful, right?
That's a great tip, is if you are creating documentation, if there's 20 ways to do something, don't document all 20 ways to do it. Just the clearest, easiest one way, and then move on. Because I've seen that where it's like, yeah, I get that there's more than one way to skin a cat, but I don't need 5 pages.
In order to copy a file,
instructions.
You can click and drag it, or you can Control-C and Control-V, or you can do other cool commands from the command line. This is amazing.
We're
Peter,
killing Chad.
It stings because I've literally just seen something very, very similar, and it cuts. Yeah, it's so
Awesome.
antithetical, like anti everything that we should be doing. And it just, it hurts. It hurts. It's soul sucking, right? And again, I truly just want to understand, like, who is this for, right? Oh, we're handing this off for the next developer, the next project team, or the next whatever. And I'm like, yeah, if I'm that next guy, really,
You're just going to read the code, right?
I'm going to pull down the code. I'm going to pull down the repo. I'm going to be like, hey, I don't understand like how you guys are using the word, you know, bunga bunga or whatever the heck. I don't know. I hope that's not a charged word, but whatever. I'm going to say like, okay, that's a word that I kind of know what it means, but
Right.
it seems like you guys are using it in a different context. So I'm going to look for something that explains that.
You're like Java, right? Oh, well, this is a coffee place. We talk about Java all the time. Oh, wait, they might be talking about a programming language, or
Yes.
wait, they might be talking about something else. So
Yes,
let's
they
figure
might-
out.
Yeah, they could be talking about a coffee, or they could be talking about one of the most elegant and extensible languages ever written by man, copied by many, duplicated by not. Like that
I
could
was
be a thing.
searching for those words. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was just
Oh.
going there for you.
That's
Peter.
helpful.
Yeah.
Are you done?
Not yet. Actually, I'm actually just getting started.
That's the only
What was that?
documentation.
What was that recent exploit that like where everybody had to update their Java because of a log thing?
No, nobody had to
That was-
update Java.
That was
Nobody had to
Log4j.
update an open.
That was
Yeah,
a whole
They
different
had to
thing.
update
Is that a
an
different
open source
thing?
library. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
The internet, it's complicated.
I
That's
don't
all I
know.
can say.
Okay,
And yet all connected.
and yet all connected. I love that there's room for nuance.
right.
Yeah.
I will say, to get back to documentation, if I could have a wiki and not 14 separate Word documents, I would love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Every single
Searchable.
time. Every single time. And this is a plug for the Atlassian team. Atlassian is a tool that we've kind of used quite a bit. I've used it throughout my career since it's been a thing. Those guys have really figured out how to tie all this stuff together, right? Between writing your stories, including wiki documentation where you need to, going back and forth, and integrating that stuff into SDLC. Like, it's pretty slick. I'm sure there are other tools similar to that. I've just been spoiled by that specific suite of products. I hope I continue to be spoiled by it. Once in a while, I have to work with SharePoint, and they all have good intentions. I just can never find anything.
And we'll leave that to we'll call that a training issue.
Yes, that's a training issue. It's my fault.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
a training issue.
I'll
It's
own
so
that.
unusual to hear a Java developer complain about SharePoint.
Thank goodness we don't have two people that work on those technologies together
Every
in the
day
same
is a chance for
podcast.
new experiences.
Yeah.
So when you hear the words, are we going to document that, or we better document that? Can you document that? How does that make you feel? Does it make you sick to your stomach and your heart sinks and you get sad? Because that's what it does to me.
Depends on that.
No.
If it's
Yeah.
3 days of fighting a particular bug and we finally found the solution, it was add a comma here, somebody should document that. Let's put it somewhere in the comments of this method that says never delete this comma because you will hate yourself.
I look at I like documenting the stuff that I go, oh crap, I better capture this. I better write this down. I better have this giant notebook of stuff. I vanish off the planet. Someone else can come in. And then I better tell Peter about it. And I tell like the 4 people that have access to it that it's here.
Right.
And hopefully one of them will remember if they ever have to log into something or do something that exists. Like there's stuff that I capture because it's like continuity. You know, it's disaster recovery. It's recovering from the disaster of me winning the lottery.
Right. Yeah, that would be a disaster for me. I know that. If Kyle wins the lottery, there's going to be tough times. Tough times for some of us, that's for sure.
Yeah, Peter, you think you're busy now.
Yeah. Well, and then it's like, okay, now I wish there was documentation. Now I want some documentation. not zero documentation. I want enough documentation to pick up the pieces of getting hit by a bus or winning the lottery, which is probably a better story.
It's a happier outcome
Well, if
for
I
sure.
had
Happier
been
outcome,
looking at that ticket, that winning lottery ticket, I probably would have seen the bus. Yeah.
That's right. Well, and the other side of it is that at least when you win the lottery, I might be able to call you and beg for the answer to this question. I know. I already
It
know
will
the answer.
vanish. You'll never. I'm a ghost.
I could call your lawyer and relay a question on the network setup through.
Call my people. Yeah,
Yes.
I'll have some people.
Right.
First thing you got to do is huge entourage. That's what you want.
Yeah.
50, 60 people that you bankroll. So
But I think
there's
documenting things as you're leaving a client or something like that to
Yeah.
avoid getting that call later on is a good thing.
yeah.
And most of the time, for developers at least, it is document your code so that people can read
Yeah.
what you did and see, like, oh, that's what this does. That's how this is done. That's the secret here.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah,
don't,
I don't usually think of it as if somebody's asking for documentation, I'm not automatically my day is not automatically ruined. I think it's a chance for you to kind of probe that request a little more. Like why am I doing this and who is it for? Is it an issue where we have a manual process that maybe we can take the time to automate so that
That
we
would be
don't
cool.
need to do it manually anymore? Maybe if it is handoff and it really is, I'm not going to be at this client anymore. And so somebody needs to know where I am in midway through a project.
which plates are spinning?
Totally. Other times it's just, well, we need something written down to prove to our finance team or to our auditing team that something happened. Like, okay. So that kind of tells you, okay, how much effort should I spend in documenting and what level, instead of saying, cool, I'm going to write 30,000 feet all the way down to negative 30,000 feet of detail.
So have you been in a position where you were just scratching your head saying to yourself, why didn't they document this?
No, because I wouldn't have. So I'm like, yep. I understand this person fully.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I don't want to harp on it, but I want to know how to build the thing, right? I want to know how to start from zero to get myself into a dev environment, right? That's it. Once I'm there, I'm going to look for our living docs. And I'm going to trust myself to be smart enough to be able to figure out, hey, if I'm dealing with something that's in a language I know, I'll be able to trace this down and say, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. That's kind of our jam, is like taking, being able to infer from existing non-documentation what a thing is doing.
Right.
If it's a brand new project, glossary, and a lot of happy hours, and we're good.
So you have a degree of expertise and experience in what you do. That's one thing I think a document can't really cover that gap.
No.
I think that's
Never.
sometimes that's the expectation of, hey, you have, your level's at a 10 for this stuff, because you've worked with it for so long. Our people are new at it. They're at a 5. We need you to document the other 5 points so that they can be experts too.
And writing the sentence that says, do software for 5 more years, and then you will be able to understand this,
Yeah.
never works. But
Because I've seen that happen where that's the expectation, is that you will leave behind a bundle of expertise that will bridge that gap for them, instead of realizing that for phase 2 they need expertise for that. It's a new thing, or to work on this you need to have the experience. You just can't write a how-to program Java and leave that behind. you expect that
Right.
the next person coming in has a level of experience. So when you're writing whatever documentation you're writing, you're assuming a level of experience as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not writing the book on the language. I'm not writing the book on all
Aw.
the tools. Nope. I've seen too many authors cry, especially technical authors that write about tools and stuff like that. It just seems so hard.
Here's the documentation for this project. Page 1, how computers work. It's
Yep.
like, no, can't do it.
Too
I'm
hard.
trying to think of the books that really help me. Like, and that's what I think of when I think of like good books. And I think like a couple of them were
Learning
like How to
Perl.
Learn X the Hard Way, right? Like, so I forget who. Like, there was a Python book like that, like how to
Yep.
how to figure out Python the hard way, and then looking behind me. Yeah, I don't know. Josh Block helped me out a lot. Effective Java, guy's a genius. That's the documentation I want. So if I hand off documentation, I'm like, here's what our project is about. Here's the glossary. That's how you build your environment. Here's Josh Block's book on effective Java. Go nuts.
Yeah,
I like-
and I'm
Yeah.
looking at my bookshelf also, and I have a Learning Perl book that's just sentimental, I think, at this point.
Is it the Larry Wall one?
It's the Camel book. I don't remember which.
Larry Wall, I bet you.
Yeah. And Programming Perl also.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Both Larry Wall books.
but
I look at
that's
a lot of
it.
stuff online. My favorite documentation,
Actually, holding up my laptop at eye level.
my favorite
Awesome.
documentation is documentation that doesn't leave out a step, that doesn't jump ahead, that doesn't assume. It starts with the first half of it. You're like, yeah, this assumes I'm going to have to go step by step through this and actually do it. And then you realize that they must have got tired of writing it, because then it goes from step 5 to step 10 directly. And you're like, well, what about this stuff? What do I do with this thing? I run into that a lot, where are they assuming that I have this missing knowledge?
Well, and
zero
I-
documentation is better than bad documentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
You don't
and
have
I
to
think
update
that
nothing.
fair. Yeah, and I think kind of what we're getting at is that writing good documentation, if you're doing every step and making sure that it's clear along, the full way, that's hard, and that is a skill in and of itself. And so then you kind of have to think about, okay, do I want to sacrifice X number of hours where I could be improving my Java skills to focus on improving my technical writing skills? Probably not, because that's not what's going to deliver value at your client.
Have you ever had fun with it though? Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I had the same experience with before I had automated API documentation. Like before I had the ability to hook in living API documentation into my SDLC, I did kind of enjoy it for a while when I had to document, especially with XML. I loved XML, and I feel like it existed before its time. I wish it would come back. It was beautiful and perfect. We just weren't ready for it.
Talk to me later.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was like, there's another podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, I very much enjoyed like actually having fun with the writing process of documentation around some of those contracts and tools. And I think I literally just watched a TED Talk by a few people about humor, and they say like globally, we've just kind of cratered as far as humor goes, and what an actual, even a stupid joke does to your brain when you see it, especially when you're not expecting to see it. And the best place to put those is in XML documentation, because you're not
That's
expecting it. And
Right.
The dopamine hit that you get when you see, oh, this nerd actually, at least tried to make something slightly funny is important.
Yeah, one the thing that comes to mind for me immediately when I had fun writing documentation was a couple years ago where I made like a choose your own adventure of debugging this manual process. Did this fail or did this fail? All right, we're going to go this way.
Yeah, there's a line where I don't want to waste time with exposition, and like I like efficiency. How few words can we use? How short can we make this? And like there's been things I've written or videos I've done where time was the length was important, or it was important just to get the ideas across, because I want to make everything funny, but it's like, well, the funny added 10 minutes. What if I just strip that out and this was like I'm just trying to inject information into your brain. I'm just trying to get this across.
Wait, so can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Do you really had to make the decision? Should I make this fun or should I make this boring? And you chose
boring and fast.
Okay. All right.
If a 5-minute video has 10 extra minutes of comedy, sometimes you have to make that choice.
Oh, that stings. That stings.
the meeting, this was in terms of we're gonna use this really long meeting time because we've got all these people here. We're gonna use this opportunity to do this extra thing. That meeting's already way too long. So then it was my mission to go, okay, how little time can I make this take? So talking fast, getting right to the meat of it. I like, if I go on YouTube or some other place to figure out how to do something and there's like 3 minutes, 4 minutes before they get into it, it's just like, they lose me. It's like, I'm there for a reason. I want to get that information. Just tell me how to do it so I can do it. I don't need a story of how you met the person that taught you how to do it. Like, I just want to know how to cook this thing. I want to know the recipe.
This is like the recipe stuff online, right? Anytime I see a recipe, I've got to scroll down through so much. Like, I don't care that your grandma made this for you when you fell out of a tree and broke your arm and you're emotionally attached to this peach cobbler. I just want the peach cobbler. And now I have to click another thing that brings me through like 3. Oh, jeez.
Put the story at the end.
Yeah.
Right.
If people want to read it, they can.
People want.
Hey, by the way, here's the story of how this recipe happened, if you care.
But I think
right
that
at the top.
That goes, Chad, it goes back to your point with, okay, if you have XML documentation and there's a joke in there, it's not 90% joke and then 10% documentation. Like there is a balance to strike.
It's got to be a surprise, right? Like it can't be all about just being a goofball. It's got to be like,
right.
Here's how you get an order in, and here's how you get a return code, and then just the stupidest jokes are the best.
It can't be a fiction with a little bit of detail.
Yes.
It has to be a lot of detail with a little bit of fiction.
Yeah. Right. You just throw one thing in there to make that one developer laugh 2 years from now when they're going to be looking through it.
That's right.
It's an Easter egg. It's just a little thing.
Yeah, those are really fun.
Yeah. Excellent. So we're never going to document anything ever again. And no one should ever document.
It has to be living,
alive,
changing constantly, either with the code or being maintained. And a lot of the
accessible
and searchable. Absolutely. You got to be able to find what you're looking for. If you can't find it, it's not documentation. It's a pile of paper with words on it that you're looking for the right words. It's a treasure hunt. Nobody goes to work saying, I want to go on a treasure hunt for documentation. Never been said before. This moment in time is treasure hunt for documentation. Never. What else?
It has to be living. You have to know where it has to be in one spot. Right, like
singular.
Right, not spots.
One version of it.
No, not even different versions of it. I'm just saying
one version of it, one source of truth.
If you're telling somebody, here's the project documentation, it shouldn't be, okay, now here's some stuff in the wiki. Here's a couple of one-off websites we made for each project team. And then here's a SharePoint location.
But they're
And
bios.
also, this other team has their own wiki, and that's over here. And then also there's some documentation. Like, no, it's here's your repo. Go there. Here's the documentation. Go there. Like, you're done.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Singular.
Yeah. Singular. One
Technical
spot.
writing is a skill set that most people don't have that do development. There's only so much skills and experience and stuff that one person can have.
Well, and
Well,
in
and
my
where do you want
college,
to?
go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, Peter.
In my college experience, technical writing was a 1/4 course, and all the programming languages were a lot more than that. So they weren't really pushing it. They did actually make me do it, which sucked, but excuse me. But yeah. All right.
Wait, what part should we excuse you for?
The bad word.
I didn't catch it.
The Minnesota bad word.
Hey, if they can say it on TV,
What
on
channel?
network television,
Okay.
before 10 o'clock,
All right.
I think
Fair
we're
enough.
good.
So anyway, yeah, it was.
But
it was not-
also, yeah, and also, is it needed? You know, when somebody says, okay, we need to document it, you are well within your rights to kind of see why, how is it going to be used, who's going to use it, to just really evaluate, is documentation the answer to the problem that we're currently trying to solve?
I think it needs to be. I think it needs to be that moment of, oh my gosh, we got to capture this. We got to get this written down. We got to say this. We got to have this.
Yes.
Almost a panic. Like, if we don't capture this, then something bad could happen.
Right.
I think it should be documentation out of desperation.
Well, and to prevent disaster, right? Like, having a disaster recovery plan is often a thing of documentation more than anything else. And it's horrible, but boy, when disaster happens, you're pretty glad that you had a plan rather than a prayer, right?
Let's wing it and hope we remember all of
Yeah.
our servers.
I'm pretty sure our backups are happening almost every day. I never check on them. I don't even know where they are, but I'm sure they're happening. I hope this database server doesn't go down right now. Fingers crossed.
And also, just, future development, just try to be omnipotent, because that helps. It's helped me.
Yeah.
Being just the all-seeing, all-knowing.
Yes.
And, then you don't have to write a lot of documentation. You are just one with your environment.
With great power comes great knowledge.
And a document is not going to replace an experienced person that has expertise.
No.
Right.
No matter how much you document something, you cannot make a junior programmer into a senior developer with documentation.
Nope.
Experience, yes. Documentation, probably not.
And with that, I think we should call it. That was the SDG podcast. Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Blah, blah, blah,
Goodbye.
blah, blah. Outro music. Fabulous.
Chad, if you could stay on the line so we can talk about SharePoint. Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.